There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter. When Alisha Aitken-Radburn signed up for the 2018 season of The Bachelor, she didn't know she'd be vying for the love of a man named Honey Badger. But what came as a bigger shock was that by the time the show aired, Alisha would find out that she'd been given the dreaded villain edit. If you're not familiar with what that means, you clearly don't watch reality TV enough, so let me enlighten you. The villain edit is the worst nightmare of anyone who's ever been on a reality show. You start off with hopes and dreams of finding love or fame or winning a prize. And instead you end up with Australia hating you, your reputation trashed, and your life basically a bin fire. And that's exactly what happened to Alisha.
There was a comment that said, she works in politics, politicians are not popular in Australia. I think she's been cast as the villain. And that was the first time that I read that word and I was like, okay, let's see what lays ahead.
Before reality TV, Alisha worked in politics. She was a staffer in Bill Shorten's office when at the age of 25, she decided to do something a bit crazy and try out for The Bachelor. Things did not go well. By the time the raw ingredients went through the reality TV sausage factory and the show came out at the other end, Alisha was gutted to find herself depicted as a nasty, mean girl, along with two other women that she'd become friends with during filming. It was a highly entertaining and dramatic storyline. I remember it well. It was great for the show and interesting to watch, but it was terrible for her. It nearly destroyed her. So why on earth did she then decide to sign up for 2 seasons of Bachelor in Paradise? Was it the money? How much money exactly? And was it worth it? Does she regret the times that she had sex with a camera in the room? And what was it like to have a cheating scandal with her now husband play out so publicly? Alisha has written a book called The Villain Edit, and she's ready to talk about what really goes on behind the scenes of reality TV. Alisha, I want to start at the end.
Okay.
I remember very clearly after you left The Bachelor match in that first time with Romy and Kat, and you were doing press. It was, I think, the day after, a couple of days after your episode had been aired where you all left. And Mamamia sent a journalist to go and interview you. And they came back and they said to me, the three of you looked shattered. And you said, is it going to be okay? And she didn't know what to say to you because she knew that it wasn't going to be okay for a long time. What do you remember of those few days after that episode aired?
I'm so thankful for you to take me back right there. It felt like we were fighting for our lives. So after you do one of these shows, Channel 10 sets you up with a day where you're in the Channel 10 studios and they just bombard you like interview after interview. So Mamamia would have been amongst that whole list. And it just felt like every single interview we were trying to claw back some sort of morsel of the people that I guess we thought that we were and then trying to convince anybody that would listen that we weren't bad people. And it was so hard. And there was that extra element as well that we were friends from this experience and we kind of were in love with each other, very obsessed with each other and thought that we were good people. We were just in this sort of very upsetting solidarity of trying to convince people that we weren't the villains that we'd been portrayed as.
What sort of questions were you being asked? Because obviously the journalists who were talking to you and the radio hosts and stuff, they weren't abusing you.
Yes.
They were respectful and asking questions. What kind of questions were they asking you?
I remember one interview that sticks in my mind really firmly was with Joannou. She was doing breakfast radio. She was really emotional about watching us on the series and said that she didn't want her daughter to watch The Bachelor anymore because we were bullies and we were bad role models.
The problem with the entertainment is I'm sitting down with my teenage daughters and Channel 10, and with the help of you guys, is glorifying bullying.
Yeah,
Okay,
look,
can I just jump in there for
hang
a second?
on, Kat. Well, I've worked in reality TV and I've been on reality TV. I understand the producers manipulate storylines. I get that.
Okay.
But they have to have the material to manipulate.
And that just cut me to my core because I guess outside of The Bachelor, I had really prided myself on being a compassionate person, and to have a mother tell me that they wouldn't let their teenage daughter watch The Bachelor because of me was just an awful feeling.
Was the psychologist on hand during that day of press?
She
Channel
was.
10 Bachelor psychologist?
Yes, she was. And in the book, I think I foregrounded her as such a key character for me in my life. The book's dedicated to her, that she really got me through, not just that first season, but the seasons after that. And so I was very thankful for that. And I also acknowledge that that's not everyone's experience. I've got lots of friends in the sort of reality TV universe these days, and some people feel very, very differently about the care and consideration given from production to them as people.
You can only speak for yourself, but to that point, I remember interviewing Sam Frost a few years ago, and she talked about she also really bonded with the psychologist. I don't know if it was the same one that was provided by the show, and she wanted to keep seeing that person after the show had ended, and she wasn't allowed.
Really?
Yeah, the show
yes, that's so
wouldn't let her,
interesting.
and she was very upset about that. I wonder, were you able to continue to see her?
I was. I've spoken to her since about this, actually. I was just so curious about what the process is between the show psychologist and the production company, because I lent on her so much, more so than I think any other contestant, to the point that there's a story in the book about when my now husband, Glenn, cheated on me, and wow, that's so hard. It feels so harsh.
That's a big sentence, which we will be unpacking shortly. We'll put a pin in that.
And I rang her immediately, and it was like a Sunday night. It was probably like, 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I just didn't even give a second thought to it. And since then I've asked her, like, what happened for you in that situation? Is it like billable hours? Are you jotting down like, Alisha, half an hour, and are you invoicing Warner Brothers? I think that is actually how it works.
And is it confidential what you say to the psychologist? Does it get funneled back to the producers, or you don't know?
This is a hard one because everyone has a different perspective. I don't know. But
Did you ever ask her?
I have not. And
Why?
I
'Cause you don't want to know?
I don't think I want to know. But also I think for me, I have a strong faith, for lack of a better word, that she's a clinician. And I think through the whole process, that's why I put so much trust in her and why I allowed myself to sort of fold myself into that relationship and really use her as such a strong support, because she's a doctor.
All right, so I've gone to the end. The other thing I want to ask you before I go back to the beginning is, so you were talking to the journalists, and with some exceptions, they were pretty like the mean girls label had been applied to the three of you. And it wasn't just after that episode, your book's called The Villain Edit for a reason. You'd realised that you were getting the villain edit. Did you also, as you were doing these interviews, have your phones, and were you looking at comments, and where were those comments?
We did, and they started to flow in sort of the middle of the season. It wasn't the first episode for me. I think it was the second episode where they really shifted into the gear of, and it's the classic Bachelor photo shoot episode. And this is what it's so interesting to explore in the villain edit, using these very obvious markers. We were all in schoolgirl outfits, and God, that sounds so awful to think back on. But they really marked us physically with the sort of like mean girls,
bitchy mean girls. Yeah.
And so it was that episode that really, it sort of shifted gears, and that's when the comments started to flow through. I write in the book about the fact that one of my now friends came to my wedding, journalist Melissa Mason. She's a freelancer. She wrote an article that like ranked me, I was least likely to win Honey Badger's heart, and she'd called me the annoying henchman of Kat and Romy, and I slid into her DMs Like I was being funny about it. I was like, oh, great article, like bit brutal of you to put me last. And I was just trying to go person by person.
Winning back hearts and minds.
Yes. One guy who slid into my DMs again, he slid into mine. He called me something awful, but I ended up trying to flirt back with him. I went on a date with him. I made out with him. He did realise that I wasn't the person that he had.
Oh, man, this resonates with me, having experienced a bit of cancellation myself, where you feel like you have to do an apology tour and explain to one person at a time that you're not who you've been made out to be.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the power of production, the power of the media, that they have your life in their hands and it's an image of you is projected to 500,000 people, and it's very hard to get the opportunity to win back the hearts and minds of that 500,000 people. I mean, I attempted it through the next 2 seasons.
So let's go back to the beginning of the story. Well, it's not quite the beginning of your story, but the beginning of this story. You're a political advisor working in Bill Shorten's office. He was leader of the opposition at the time. It was late enough into the Bachelor's seasons for you to know that you probably weren't going to find love. Is that fair to say?
I would say across the board for most reality TV, people who choose to go do reality TV, I'd say most of them are doing it for the experience. But I did have a glimmer of hope.
How old were you?
I was 25.
So you had to quit your job, didn't you? Because you couldn't take a leave. How long did you have to make yourself available for?
So they said 3 months.
That's a big risk.
Yes. And I tried to have the conversation with Bill Shorten's office, which was very looking back on that whole situation, I'd probably the words I'd use would be naive and cute. Oh my gosh, Mia, I sent an email to Department of Parliamentary Services scoping out whether I could shoot my intro piece. You know, those intro pieces at the beginning of The Bachelor where it's
a little package to explain who you are.
A girl skating down the foreshore of some beautiful beach and she's a skater girl. I genuinely thought, I'm guys, we'll do it in the forecourt of Parliament House. It'll be political staffer and then maybe Bill could be in it.
She didn't know what she didn't know.
She did not know what she didn't know. And in my world, I guess I thought I was so embedded in the Labor Party and really did feel that it was a Labor family, a community. It wasn't just a regular office. You've got this whole movement of people around you. And so I think at the top of my optimism was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be embraced and everyone's going to really get behind me, which wasn't really how it went.
And was it a bit more you suddenly became a bad smell that everyone wanted to get away from?
Yes.
Even before it started, the fact that you were going to go on it.
You know, it wasn't an absolutely homogenous reaction. I did have friends and usually younger people, to be honest, peers that were staffers and were really supportive, and once it aired, really got around me.
Once you were selected, I imagine you then are in the sausage machine.
Yes.
It begins.
And I loved the machine.
Did you?
I was fascinated at every single point.
How does the machine start? Take us through it for a civilian.
Oh, okay. So the first point of contact was receiving an email saying, congratulations, you've been successful on The Bachelor. And then once you're in the machine, I think I must have had about 3 or 4 weeks before they bought me a flight to Sydney from Canberra and I was on the plane. From that point, I'm doing psych assessments, I'm doing medicals. And
where are you living at that point?
I was living in Canberra.
No, but when they fly you to Sydney, where do they put you?
Okay, so you land at Sydney Airport and they pop you in a white van. They give you black hoodies. You're told to bring sunglasses. And that just tickled all of us.
Were you with other girls?
Yeah, we were in a van and we weren't allowed to talk to each other.
That sounds like a hostage situation. So, but I mean, that's not really necessary, is it? Is that more, when you say it tickled you, is that more to just...
It tickled me in the sense that I was wow, we are celebs. We're absolutely celebs. People are talking about the Daily Mail. They're talking about Paps. So from that van, you end up at sort of like a Quest Apartments. We were in Chatswood and you're there for 3 days, just you and one other girl in a room together. That's called the sequester. And that is…
Do they take your phones?
They do. And
oh my God.
It's so funny. I'm such a rule follower, but we did have a clock radio in our room. And I remember, I didn't listen to it for long, but I remember being able to listen to
You're not meant
Carl.
to listen to the radio.
You're not meant to, no, and no
Why?
TV.
Why?
Well, so this is a really important part of the process. It's moving you from the reality of the real world to the reality of the Bachelor universe. And people often wonder, like, how are these people acting in these particular ways? And it's just a completely different environment. You don't have your support network. You don't really even have, like, while you have the other girls, you are still building your relationships with the other girls. And I think that there's like an element of like, can I trust these people?
I want to know about that first night though, because from what I hear, the first night is often filmed over 1 or 2 nights.
Yes.
It's a really long night.
Yep.
It's often really cold. You are told to get ready. Like, what are you told to pack? How much luggage can you bring?
So we were allowed 2 23-kilo suitcases, and that was pressure in and of itself because I'm like, oh, I'm going on a reality TV show. I want to look good.
Yeah, you don't know what dates you're going to go on.
Yes,
Or
exactly. And so…
did they say you need this many formal?
Yes, you get a full list and it has everything laid out. It even goes to say like contact lenses, bring 3 months worth, protein powder, make sure you bring your own if you're that way inclined. I wasn't.
Why protein powder?
I don't know.
Seems quite
Like
specific.
I think if you're like a
like vitamins,
fitness
medication.
person, yeah, I think if you're into fitness. But just like these are the things that we can't source for you. Also interesting to me was, you're right, our first episode was filmed over 2 nights. And I think I got in pretty early with my chat and it became very evident there was only going to be time for, you know, every girl was going to get one chat. Maybe some girls didn't even get a chat on that.
But what about the bit when you have to get out of the car and learning who…
Yeah.
who the guy is?
Okay, so for my season, I actually knew that it was the honey badger.
How?
So the morning that I was flying to Sydney, I went to Woolies, Canberra Dixon Woolies. And so I'm scooting through all the aisles. I think my flight was about lunchtime and I walked past where they've got all the magazines and there was a copy of the Daily Telegraph and I saw on the front there was a little guy holding a rose. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a Bachelor promo. So I quickly flipped to the page and I've still got a copy of the photo that I took of this spread. And it was a full page spread. This was legit. And the timing was right as well. I don't actually think that production or even like Channel 10 publicity had meant for that to happen. I don't think that.
So it leaked early. You weren't meant to
early.
know.
Yeah. And I remember, I'm a rugby league girl, not rugby union, but I did sort of know, you know, Honey Badger did have a bit of a cult of personality around him, particularly with men. And that's what they were doing, right? Like they had cast the Honey Badger to try and like open up the audience.
Locify it a bit?
Yeah, he was a different choice. I mean, like it's not like he was wildly diverse or anything like that, but he was different to like Tim Robards or Sam Wood. Very like similar.
A bit more blokey bloke.
Yeah. And so I Googled him and I like watched all of the little YouTube clips of him saying like a pack of glass on an esky or whatever.
And did you think could be? Or
I
you
was
were like,
into it. I was fully into it.
If I end up getting a gig, mate, I'll be going off like a cut snake. When the start of this season turns up, the boys will be, going off like a ball in a china shop. Sweating like a gypsy with a mortgage, actually, when he got up after scoring that try.
I kind of thought, oh, this is like an awkward guy. I might be able to connect with him.
Bit of a larrikin.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, like from the first meeting, I feel like when I meet someone, I just know if they're my person or not.
Yeah.
And this is
not
just
even
like,
in a romantic way.
Not even in a romantic way. Like you walked into the podcast studio this morning and I'm like, oh my God, like
Same.
my gal.
It's like you've either got chemistry or you don't.
And that's what happened with Kat and
in
Romy,
an interpersonal
which
way.
was really interesting.
Yeah.
But when I met the honey badger, not even close. Like I'm sure if we went and had a coffee now, we would connect as people. But I just knew instantaneously, oh, like, no, this is not happening.
Did they tell you, because it's now become increasingly common for like someone to come out and juggle fire and
Yes.
like everyone has to have
yes.
a gimmick, right? So did they encourage you to have a gimmick?
Yes, they did. And I really like studied the art form that was The Bachelor. I loved The Bachelor. I would just consume everything about The Bachelor. And so I was well studied. And I thought from my analysis, the gimmick is a setup. I looked at previous seasons. I looked at Anna's entry on the first season of The Bachelor. And it's all just like a nice hello and a brief conversation. So I was like, they are setting me up. And I remember taking the call. I was still working for Bill. I hadn't resigned yet. And I was in Tasmania because I was a media advancer. So I'm flying everywhere. And I'm having this conversation about what the producers wanted me to do on the red carpet. And they were really like pulling teeth of like trying to get me to come up with something. And what her suggestion was, this producer, was, do you remember Merlin on Big Brother? So Merlin famously came out. He was eliminated from Big Brother. Gretel Colleen's on stage. He brought out this poster that said "Free the Refugees," and he put a piece of duct tape over his mouth, and it was just the most amazing cultural moment.
Yeah.
Merlin, are you going to speak? Merlin, are you going to speak at all?
Gretel sat through presenting him with his prizes and things like that while he was just so staunch.
That's right, yeah.
And he just kept
So they
this
wanted
duct
you to do
tape.
something like that?
They wanted me to walk down the red carpet and they wanted me to put a piece of duct tape over my mouth and just stand there and look into his eyes and connect through your eyes. And I'm like, firstly, this is fully offensive to Merlin, who like, that was an iconic moment, a proper political statement. And you want to make a mockery of Merlin. And I was like, you are setting me up.
Did you say that or you just thought that?
I tried to write this in the book and it was really hard to express in words. But I was like, I'm going to walk down the red carpet and I'm going to get the doop-de-doo music. It's like the doom, 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 doom. And it's the like jester. It's an archetype on the show. And I know that the jester does not get far.
Nah.
I wanted to get past at least halfway through the season.
So you went into this with such literacy, such
Yes.
reality TV literacy, such Bachelor literacy, and yet, so you walk down, you do the normal thing. What are the tricks that they use, or the techniques, let's call them, to encourage you to say things that you might not say to get the good TV?
I don't know whether it was like I'd been deliberately psychoanalyzed to sort of figure out what my trigger points would have been. Maybe they do that. I think that's slightly wild, but maybe they do. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. For me, the explainer for my villain edit is that I'm a deeply insecure person. And so what my trigger point was that I was sitting in these interviews and I would say something that was like a little bit on the nose, a little bit bitchy. Like, firstly, they're not asking me about the honey badger at all because I'm not considered a front runner or a contender. So I'm only being asked about the other girls. So that's one technique. You know, other women are spending their whole interviews talking about their blossoming relationship.
How did you know that?
I think we can see that as audience members.
But did you talk to each other afterwards, or this is only when you started watching the show you realised how different your interviews were?
A bit of both. The girls were actually quite siloed. I actually don't have an explainer for why this happens or whether it's the same on different series. But for us, the front runners, Britt Hockley, Sophie Tierman and Cass Wood, they were the top three. Oh, sorry, Brooke was also there. Sorry, Brooke. They were friends. And so it actually did feel like the girls were siloed into when they were going to leave the show. And I don't know whether that was just natural, but for us, it worked that way. And so I wasn't really able to garner whether they were having a particularly different experience to me. And then on top of, you know, the questions that I was being asked, I would make a bit of an edgy comment and the producer would laugh. And that was just like kryptonite for me because there's a very fine line between being funny. And this is interesting because in my Bachelor experience, I've sort of tread this line between the funny commentator, funny narrator, and the villain. And it's a very fine line. And I think sometimes we do connect with villains because they are funny.
Yeah, the best villains are funny.
Yeah. And so that was my experience. I would be like, say an edgy comment, they would laugh.
And you would feel like you were doing a good job.
Oh my gosh. And
it was validating.
It was so validating. And that's also the person that I was hoping to present to Australia afterwards. I think everyone has an idea of how they would like to come across. And for me, actually, the blueprint was Tara Pavlovich.
Our first word is Devo. D-E-V-O. Devo. Short for devastated. Last night when Nina left, I was quite Devo.
She was on Maddie J's season. She was in the top 4 and she was the funny narrator. And I was like, oh, I want to be her. And I got this really good run in the first episode, and I go into it in the book because I was eliminated and I'd cultivated such a good relationship with the producers that I was invited back to do some interviews. Well, at least that's how I saw it. I was like, wow, favourite. They've come pick me up from my share house in Leichhardt and they're bringing me back on set after I've been eliminated.
That's unusual.
I don't know if it has happened before. And it was like they had a colouring book and it was half full and I coloured in the rest for them.
Now looking with what you know, what were they trying to get?
I think it was quite practical in a sense. They had a story that they were hoping to tell, but we were 6 weeks down the track, so it was going to be really hard to get any of the girls to comment on the first episodes. And I was just putty in their hands of wanting to do a good job.
And what kind of questions were they asking you?
Oh my gosh, they were asking me stuff that I didn't even know about. And today, as a 30-year-old woman, I'd like to say that I wouldn't comment on things that I hadn't seen.
Can you give me an example?
Okay, so... And this is why I was received as the funny narrator in the first episode. They were trying to create this narrative about one of the contestants, Cass. So there was a plot point that she already knew the Bachelor in real life. And this did actually play out in the mansion. She was quite evasive of sharing what was their relationship. And in the first episode, I think it's revealed that she has a diary and she sort of was manifesting a relationship with Honey Badger. And so I don't think that they had quite the volume of interviews to tell that story. And so they brought me back and one of my producers, and they've obviously also put me with the producer that I love the most and I want to do the good job for. I felt like I was being brought into their trust, almost I was a producer myself.
Yeah. Hey, help us out.
Yeah, can you help us out? And
yeah.
I was like, I've got this political and media background and I was just
I want to do a good job. I know what your job's like. I know what you need.
Yes.
I'll help you get it.
Yes. And so he was quite he sort of brought me in and he told me exactly what his objective was. And he said look, we've got all these shots of Cass. She's peeking around corners and stuff like that. She looks like she's really obsessed and stalker vibes. And I just performed. I performed for them.
Cass is clocking Nick's every move. She's on the constant lookout for where he is, who he's talking to, and what he's doing.
Where did they go?
Everywhere Nick moves, Cass is there within eye shot.
Can I touch your curls?
She's over by the love nook.
Oh.
Ooh, Nick's over here talking to someone.
Having a long chat.
They're over by the pergola.
So I'm just expecting
hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Here's Cassie.
I don't even know the reference myself, but I did that knife and
Yeah.
God forbid if the bloke wants to go to the toilet, Cass will be following Nick in there too.
And so after that first episode, that was edgy stuff. I wasn't being a nice person. I think I called her a bunny boiler, which is an awful, awful thing to say about somebody.
If this is anything to go by, hope Nick doesn't have any pet bunnies at home because I'd be locking them in their hutches.
But in the room, I get it. It's hard to explain to people who've not done media or done TV before, but you've got two audiences and it's very easy to forget the audience that isn't there. And play for the audience that is. And they are trying to get you to do what they want you to
and
do.
And I felt almost that I was not portrayed in that first episode of season 6 as a mean girl. I was the funny narrator, and I almost felt like watching it back that because I'd scratched the producers back, they were then scratching mine. And Osha tweeted calling me the Tara of the season.
Goals.
And I was like, oh my God, I've done it.
After the break, Alisha tells me about the moment she realised she wasn't going to be the funny girl, but instead turned into the villain. Thanks to the villain edit. And she's pretty open about what went on in the bedroom on Bachelor in Paradise. When you were in the house, when did you notice it shift? When did you first start to go,
Oh,
villain edit?
the moment in time that it all crystallized for me most strongly was they give you your phones immediately when you're eliminated. You're put back into that same van and they hand you your phone, and they charged it for us, which I think they thought was a really nice thing to do. But the first thing I did was Google my name, and already the season hadn't even gone to air yet. I found this forum, which becomes a really big feature of both my life and the book. And it's sort of like a spoiler sleuthing forum where a group of people are so into The Bachelor, I guess. They like sleuthing the show more than they even like watching the show, but they have an awareness that it's formulaic. But anyway, I'd Googled my name. I found this forum that had pictures of us from paparazzi upload their photo onto Matrix or something, and they had sleuthed half of the cast, and I was amongst them. And I think there were a couple of Daily Mail articles because I'd left the opposition leader's office that said I was going to pursue a project. So they were able to put some puzzle pieces together. And there was a comment that said, she works in politics. Politicians are not popular in Australia. I think she's been cast as the villain. And that was the first time that I read that word. And I was like, okay, let's see what lays ahead.
For those who don't remember, and I'm one of them, what did you actually do, the three of you?
I would say that Kat and Romy, there were really atrocious commentary on the other women.
Can you stop talking to bloody lame dick Tanil? She's boring. Lemon. Oh my God.
Hello, how are you? Nice to meet you then. Well, I'm Ashley.
The intruders are definitely debatable. I thought there'd be some better ones coming in, but I don't really feel threatened by these three girls that have arrived. They don't stand a chance.
We had the intruders come in, and God, the producers just blow that up of pitting these groups of women against each other. But there is actually some real emotions around the intruders coming in because I've been there for 6 weeks. I haven't had a date. I've hardly even talked to the guy.
How do they heighten that level of competition?
They bombard you with questions about it, almost to the point that you read the card that says, these 3 new girls are coming into the mansion, and then you're put into interviews where you are asked so many questions about, you've been here for so long, Mia. How do you feel about these girls coming in? That almost you start to take on that perspective of the producer. And so going back to Kat, one of her clips was one of the intruders was a woman called Deanna, and she did a Deanna, pretending she didn't know her name in a really bitchy way.
I think one of their names, it's Di or Daria or Danica or something. No one remembers.
I think it was those moments. And also it was commentary on the other girls' bodies and faces that really cemented us as not nice people.
And when you were sitting there and they were saying these things, were you like, shit, I've got to get away from this situation?
Yeah. So not only was I trying to get validation from the producers, but I also wanted these 2 girls that I had clicked with in a very magnetic way, in the way that I didn't click with The Bachelor. I wanted them to like me as well. And I also felt this sense of loyalty every part of my life is the same. It's how I was in the Labor Party as well. I felt this sense of loyalty to them, actually, and this was amplified after the show, that I do know them as people. They said really bad things, but that wasn't their full self. And I felt like I would be being a bad friend if I tried to do this thing. And I think so many people grapple with this in different areas of their life. We have people in our lives where they've made a really bad mistake and you're kind of like, when do I ditch this person for my own brand? And I couldn't take that step. People in my life after the show, political friends, were messaging me being like, trying to strategize from a media perspective and be like, just drop them. And I just could not do that because I think that would have been being a bad person.
You say in the book that you also were reading all the comments because you felt that you needed to be held accountable.
Yes.
For what you'd done. Was it almost a form of self-harm?
Yes. It was punishment because I had reflected. And so I knew all of the nuances of it. I knew the role of producers. I knew that I had good relationships. I knew that these girls that I had gone through this experience with, I actually could say pretty wholeheartedly that I knew that they didn't think that I was a bad person. But on reflection, I could see the mistakes that I had made and what my regrets were. And so I did really consume the comments as a form of punishment.
Did you feel betrayed by the producers? Like, did you text them or the editors or the production? Did you say, hey, guys, this is fucked?
Romy did. That was definitely her experience. She chose not to do Bachelor in Paradise. We were all offered, and that's another thing because once Romy decided not to do the next season, I was nervous I'd be dropped because I wasn't the most interesting and I thought that we would come as a trio, the Mean Girls reunited. But she definitely felt betrayed. I think I probably had more of the perspective of like going back to trying to help a producer do their job. I think I was probably able to look at it a little bit more like they're just doing their job. So I probably had a little bit more.
You didn't take it personally.
Yeah, I didn't take it personally. I think I could also hold two things in the same thought. Like I think that they were manipulating me, but I think that they were also my genuine friend as well. That's so bad. But they are doing their job, and that's a whole nother debate entirely about like whether it's an ethical job to do or…
When the interviews were over and you were just in the world, and I imagine Channel 10's like, thanks so much, bye.
Oh.
What happens after that? Because the show's still going. Australia still has big feelings about you.
It was quite fast moving for me, and I think the show was airing, and I think it was even before I'd been eliminated from The Bachelor, I had already received a call from Warner Brothers asking if I'd been interested to do Bachelor in Paradise. And that was almost a little bit of a comfort blanket to all of these really awful things happening, because why would you want to go to another reality TV show when you've just been absolutely decimated in comments in the media?
Did people come up to you in the street? Like, were you nervous to be out in public?
Not so much me. Someone called Kat a see you next Tuesday in a pub, and I know that that was really hard for her.
Did you feel unsafe? Did you wonder how you'd ever get your life back?
I did. And I think that Bachelor in Paradise was a comfort blanket that I thought I had a vehicle. We were talking at the beginning of the pod that, you know, very, very quickly a TV channel can blast this image to 500,000 people of you. And from a pragmatic perspective, I thought, okay, well, the best way to repair my life is to try and get a different image.
So that was your damage control.
It was.
Bold move.
Yeah. It kind of paid off.
What was the time lapse between?
Okay, so I reckon I was eliminated probably in around September, and I was off to film Bachelor in Paradise in early November. So I only had to harbour the storm for a couple of months before I was in the bubble, before I was in Fiji, before I was with all of my producer friends.
Did people around you say, what are you doing?
I really was just running my own race. And so this is also a hard thing to unpack in the sense that, like, everyone in politics particularly were like, wow, what are you doing? You're ruining your life. But I was actually just acting really authentically. I really wanted to do the shows. I really enjoyed the experience. And so I just kept doing something that was making me happy.
When you agreed to do Bachelor in Paradise, did you say, hey, guys, you gave me the villain edit?
It
Is
never
that what
really
you're doing
came in.
again?
It never really came into it for me. I think Bachelor in Paradise was a much better format for me.
Why?
The Bachelor, there's no time on The Bachelor. And I'm talking about that from the perspective that they're 90-minute episodes. It's a story about the lead. It's about Sam Frost finding love. It's about Nick Cummins finding love. It's about Maddie J finding love. It's not about—
It's a main character show, not an ensemble.
There's no time to explore, like, how were they going to explore the nuances of my personality when I wasn't even a front runner. There was no reason to.
So you had to become a caricature essentially.
Yes, yeah.
And you felt confident that with certain changes, did you go in, what did you change about your behaviour in the second
I was
reality
probably a little bit more aware of that dynamic of— I think I'd identified that I was putty in the producer's hands, so I was a little bit more careful with that. And it's a question I'm asked a lot, like, did you re-strategize? Did you try and change your personality? And I didn't, because I didn't for the first show either. I went into that, other than the fact that an aspect of my personality is the insecurity, which led me to being able to be portrayed the way that I was. But I remember on the first night, I was immensely, and I think many of the girls are, deeply afraid of being the villain. And I remember I was hardly giving anything in interviews at the start of the first season of The Bachelor. And you know, the producers are really trying to get all these women to open up who are nervous about how they will be portrayed in the end. And I remember did this self-talk where I was like, my only defense to being cast as the villain is going to be myself, because at my core, I believed that I was a good person.
That didn't work.
And it did not work. And I went in with the same strategy to be myself on the second show, and it worked because it was a better environment. There was more time to explore all these personalities. And there was also opportunity in the second show to meet different people and have the relationship dynamic explored. So I was lucky in the sense that I did connect with somebody, and then people were able to see the sort of person I am and the choices that I was making and the emotional reactions I was having to exploring this relationship with Jules, who I fell in love with on the first season of Bachelor in Paradise.
What's that process, falling in love in front of a camera?
It was
on a reality show for real.
Awesome. I think I was cynical to an extent that I was like, particularly after The Bachelor, where I was like, it doesn't happen and I don't know how it has happened for other people. And then as soon as I met Jules, I was like, oh, wow, like I am having all of these emotions. And it was probably the first time I remember going on our first date. It was genuinely the first time through the whole first season and even on Bachelor in Paradise where I forgot that the cameras were there and I just enjoyed myself. And that's sort of how it tracked from that point on. I was just having a great time. I was just on an awesome date and we were just having fun. It sounds difficult, but they just faded away. And from that point on, I think that unlocked a level of comfortability for me.
But what about when you want to have sex?
Well, there's a camera in the room.
So what do you do?
I had a conversation with the executive producer. I'd basically gotten an assurance that they don't actually use that content if you're like fully having sex in a bed. That was a lie because they did use that footage on the third season where Abby Chatfield was featured, and they used clips that deeply, deeply insinuated that she was like maybe giving a hand job. That was the implication. But there was like stuff happening underneath the sheets. But I took that reassurance and I had sex with the camera in the room. And I don't know why I was so confident about that. I think it went to the fact I really liked him. That's bizarre to me that like there is a room of people with they're called hotheads. So it's not like there wasn't like old mate Jeff with his camera set up in this corner of the room. There's like a little, almost like a security camera, but it's good enough technology that they can actually pick up on your conversations. There wasn't a person in the room. That would be a whole different show that we were shooting.
Yeah.
Probably get paid a lot more. So, and you can see them swivel around and stuff. And there is a room of producers watching what's happening. That's so strange to me. You're like, someone has fully watched me have sex.
Were you under the covers at least?
Yeah, I think so.
I can imagine that you would forget after a while.
Yeah, I forgot. And I guess.
How did that relationship end?
Very badly. When I first told Jules about the book, I tried to take a little bit of accountability for my role in our relationship and how it ended up. So how it ended up was basically the climax. We're really going back to the hothead in the room. The climax of the show was the reunion, which we filmed, and we had seen the show, like we were watching it in real time. So I don't think the finale had aired yet, but we were deep into the show airing, and they invited us all back to Channel 10 in the basement, and we filmed a reunion special where they also showed us clips that I hadn't seen yet and were just so emotional, like clips of me and Jules kissing, and then I obviously knew how it ended.
How did it end?
Well, on the show, the climax of the show is the commitment ceremony, and I think he was actually willing to do the commitment ceremony. I thought he was just going to let it play out. I don't even know what he was going to say to me at the commitment ceremony, but I got all in tangles. I remember talking to the executive producer in tears when we were meant to be like filming the last sort of chat you have before going to the commitment ceremony. And I said, I will not go and like get in a pretty dress, put my makeup on for this guy to tell me that we were in a sort of friends with benefits situation at that point. What was I going to do? Prepare a speech and tell him how much I loved him? And so I had that conversation. I basically like gave him an ultimatum.
If you can't give me anything better than mates before we leave Paradise, then I'm leaving.
Okay.
And that's fine. I'm not your mate, Jules, nor have I been this whole time. And if you think that I'm being your friend through this process, you're kidding yourself.
Yep.
So that played out. And then when we got outside, when we finished the show, his response to the ultimatum was, it's still like flaky and like we're friends, but we're having sex, whatever. Something so many women, like I think people related to that season because every woman has been in that situation where they really like someone and they're just not getting clear communication. And so he was just flaky. And so I actually called it. It was very like girl power, femo energy. Outside of the show, I did see him again. And I think there was about 4 months between filming, wrapping and the show airing. And I sort of just kept, I've since found a term for it, breadcrumbing. He would give me just like a little bit to keep us in a friendly dynamic as well for the show airing. I think it was quite strategic. I don't know if he would.
Because he didn't want the villain edit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he thought that maybe if he breadcrumbed me a little bit and kept me sort of happy and us friendly, that it wouldn't land where it once did, which is the reunion. One thing I love thinking about is what is proportional punishment? What's disproportionate? And I really went so hard. Actually, something that didn't make it to air, he had, because we'd seen each other in the months between filming and airing, and he'd left a pair of undies at my house. And at the reunion, this is how hard I went. And they actually pulled back my edit a little bit to make me look better. I was actually like, thank you so much for that. They did owe me one. I did that good work for them. I held up his undies. I was like, and give these back. And there was a whole audience there. It was actually wild, and they did not include that. It was a moment. Maybe we can get the outtakes from Warner Brothers.
That sounds excellent.
And so I guess reflecting on it, and I've talked to Jules since, in part this book is a little bit of an apology in a sense to him, because I don't think that was proportionate. Like, he was shit. He was awful. He was like every like fucking shitty ex-boyfriend we've had or like, relationship we've tried to pursue. And he's since apologized to me for his role in it. But I don't think what I did to him in the reunion was fair.
This was not the end of my conversation with Alisha. We kept the microphones running because, of course, I wanted to know exactly how much money persuaded her to have a third crack at reality TV after getting her heart broken. And I asked her about her and Glenn's public cheating scandal after Bachelor in Paradise, which she told me involved alcohol, attempted revenge, and 2 other contestants. Oh, it's so juicy. Here's a little taste.
Someone's like, oh, we're so happy, like we heard that you and Glenn made it to the end. And I think that's when I sort of like burst into tears and I said, he cheated on me with Eleanor. And then I just keep like smashing the drinks all afternoon. And I end up taking one of our other castmates back to my house.
You can listen to that episode right now by clicking on the link in the show notes. The executive producer of No Filter is Kimberly Bradish, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Friedman. Thanks for having me in your ears.